The fluorescent lights of Blackwood Rehabilitation Academy hummed with their usual institutional persistence as the morning intake procedures began. Elena Vasquez reviewed the enrollment documents spread across her mahogany desk, each file representing another attempt at human reclamation. The academy specialized in intensive behavioral modification programs, primarily housing individuals with violent histories, antisocial disorders, and predatory behaviors. It was not a place for the innocent. Sarah Chen's file should never have crossed her desk. The 17-year-old girl sat in the waiting area outside the administration office, her medical bracelet catching the harsh overhead lighting. The bracelet bore the insignia of the Children's Miracle Foundation, marking her as a survivor of acute lymphoblastic leukemia. She had spent the better part of 2 years in treatment, her young body ravaged by chemotherapy and radiation, her spirit somehow remaining intact despite the medical assault. The bureaucratic error that had placed her name on Blackwood's enrollment roster instead of Riverside Preparatory Academy, her intended educational destination for catch-up studies, would soon become the catalyst for an extraordinary transformation. Dr. Vasquez frowned as she cross-referenced the admission codes. Sarah's psychological evaluation indicated a withdrawn personality, likely stemming from prolonged medical isolation, with symptoms of mild depression and anxiety, hardly the profile of someone requiring maximum security educational intervention. Her academic records showed exceptional performance prior to her illness, with particular strength in analytical thinking and problem-solving. The girl possessed an IQ of 156. Placing her in the highly gifted category. The error had originated in the state's educational placement algorithm, a computerized system that had mistakenly flagged Sarah's medical leave as juvenile detention time. A series of clerical mistakes had compounded the problem. Her oncology ward stays were coded as institutional confinement, her isolation periods during treatment were classified as solitary punishment, and her reduced immune system status was interpreted as a behavioral modification requirement. When Sarah was escorted through Blackwood's security checkpoint that Monday morning, her confusion was evident but contained. She had learned to adapt to institutional environments during her medical treatment, accepting authority figures and following protocols without question. The stark differences between this facility and her expectations of a preparatory academy were immediately apparent, but her recent experiences had taught her that adult institutions often operated in ways that seemed arbitrary to the young. The orientation process at Blackwood followed a rigid structure designed to establish dominance and control over incoming students. Sarah found herself grouped with 12 other new arrivals, most of whom bore the hardened expressions and aggressive postures of individuals accustomed to violence. The orientation supervisor, Mr. Ray, Marcus Reed, was a former corrections officer whose approach to education resembled military discipline more than academic instruction. "Welcome to your last chance," Reed announced to the assembled group in the main hall. "Everyone in this room has proven they cannot function in normal society. You are here because traditional educational methods have failed you, because you represent a danger to others, or because you have demonstrated predatory behaviors that require intensive intervention." Sarah's slight frame seemed almost ethereal among the collection of hardened teenagers surrounding her, while others in the group displayed the defensive postures and suspicious glances of seasoned troublemakers. She maintained the quiet attentiveness that had served her well during medical consultations and treatment planning sessions. Her pallor, a lingering effect of her recent chemotherapy, gave her an otherworldly appearance that immediately set her apart. The Academy's intake psychological evaluation was conducted by Dr. James Hendricks, a behavioral specialist who had spent 15 years working with violent juvenile offenders. His assessment methods were designed to identify manipulation tactics, aggressive tendencies, and potential for rehabilitation among the most challenging cases in the juvenile justice system. When Sarah entered his office for the mandatory evaluation, he expected to encounter another case requiring intensive behavioral intervention. Instead, he found himself facing a polite, articulate teenager who answered his questions with thoughtful consideration and displayed none of the defensive mechanisms typical of his usual subjects. Her responses to the standardized psychological batteries consistently indicated high intelligence, strong moral reasoning, and a complete absence of antisocial tendencies. Dr. Hendricks found himself repeatedly reviewing her file, unable to reconcile the evaluation results with her presence at Blackwood. "Sarah," Dr. Hendricks said, leaning forward in his chair, "I need to ask you directly, do you understand why you've been placed in this program?" Her response revealed the depth of the administrative error. "I was told this was an intensive academic program designed to help students who had missed significant classroom time due to medical issues. My oncologist recommended accelerated studies to help me catch up with my peer group before college applications. Dr. Trow. Hendricks realized he was witnessing either an elaborate deception or a catastrophic bureaucratic failure. Sarah's medical records, which he accessed with appropriate authorization, confirmed her recent cancer treatment and the legitimate educational gap requiring intervention. However, the institutional procedures at Blackwood were already in motion, and the Academy's rigid structure did not easily accommodate corrections once the intake process had begun. The dormitory assignment placed Sarah in a room with Jessica Martinez, a 15-year-old with a history of assault charges and gang affiliations. Jessica's initial reaction to a new roommate was a mixture of confusion and territorial aggression. She had expected another hardened individual, someone who would either challenge her dominance or submit to it. Sarah's quiet courtesy and obvious physical fragility created a dynamic that Jessica had never encountered in institutional settings. "What are you in for?" Jessica asked on their first evening together, using the standard inquiry that established pecking order among Blackwood students. "I had leukemia," Sarah replied simply, not understanding the context of the question. "I'm here to catch up on my studies." Jessica's worldview did not include categories for cancer survivors or academic catch-up programs. Her institutional experience had taught her that weakness was exploited and that survival required constant vigilance against threats. Sarah's apparent vulnerability should have made her an immediate target for exploitation, yet something about her calm acceptance of the situation created an unexpected dynamic. The Academy's daily schedule was designed around behavior modification principles, combining academic instruction with intensive counseling, group therapy sessions, and structured recreational activities. Students were awakened at 5:30 a.m. for mandatory physical fitness training, followed by communal meals where conversation was monitored and regulated. The academic curriculum emphasized basic skills recovery and anger management rather than advanced preparation for higher education. Sarah approached this routine with the same methodical compliance that had characterized her medical treatment regimen. She had learned to find meaning and purpose within restrictive institutional frameworks, to maintain hope and intellectual curiosity despite physical discomfort and emotional isolation. Her adaptation to Blackwood's environment was remarkably smooth, though staff members began to notice anomalies in her behavior patterns compared to typical students. During the mandatory group therapy sessions, led by Dr. Patricia Williams, Sarah's contributions consistently differed from those of her peers. While others discussed anger management, impulse control, and strategies for avoiding violent confrontation, Sarah spoke about finding purpose in suffering, developing resilience through adversity, and maintaining optimism in the face of uncertain outcomes. Her perspective on institutional life came from medical necessity rather than legal compulsion, creating a philosophical framework that confused both staff and students. Sarah, Dr. Williams said during one particularly revealing session, "You seem to have developed remarkable coping strategies. Can you tell the group how you learned to accept authority and follow institutional rules?" "When you're fighting for your life," Sarah replied, "you learn to trust the people trying to help you, even when their methods seem harsh or arbitrary. Medical treatment required me to accept painful procedures because they served a larger purpose. I suppose I've learned to look for that larger purpose in any institutional setting." The other students in the therapy circle listened with expressions ranging from confusion to grudging respect. Many of them had developed oppositional relationships with authority figures as a result of abandonment, abuse, or social failure. Sarah's voluntary acceptance of institutional structure represented a completely foreign concept, yet one that seemed to produce tangible benefits in terms of stress reduction and goal achievement. Marcus Reed observed Sarah's adaptation with growing perplexity. His experience with Blackwood students had taught him to expect either immediate rebellion or sullen compliance masking underlying hostility. Sarah displayed neither pattern. She followed instructions promptly and completely, asked thoughtful questions about expectations and procedures, and seemed genuinely interested in understanding the reasoning behind institutional rules. During the mandatory physical fitness training, Sarah's limitations became apparent. Her recent medical treatment had left her with reduced stamina and muscle weakness, making the standard exercise routines extremely challenging. However, rather than using her condition as an excuse for non-compliance, she approached the physical training with the same determination she had applied to cancer treatment. She modified exercises to accommodate her limitations while still participating fully, earning grudging respect from both instructors and fellow students. The academic instruction at Blackwood was designed for students with learning disabilities, attention deficits, and gaps in basic educational foundation. Sarah's intellectual capabilities became immediately apparent to her instructors, who found themselves challenged to provide appropriate material for someone functioning at a gifted level. Her presence in remedial mathematics and basic English composition classes created an awkward dynamic that highlighted the inadequacy of the Academy's placement procedures. Professor Michael Thompson, who taught the advanced academic track for Blackwood's most capable students, requested Sarah's transfer to his classes after observing her performance in the standard curriculum. His courses focused on preparing students for eventual reintegration into traditional educational settings, emphasizing critical thinking skills and academic responsibility rather than basic skill recovery. Sarah's intellectual hunger became apparent in Thompson's classes. Deprived of challenging academic material during her medical treatment, she approached advanced coursework with an intensity that impressed even the veteran educator. Her analytical papers demonstrated sophisticated reasoning abilities, while her mathematical problem-solving showed creative approaches that surpassed grade-level expectations. Within 2 weeks of placement in the advanced track, Thompson realized he was working with someone who belonged in college preparatory programs rather than rehabilitation education. The social dynamics within Blackwood's student population began to shift as Sarah's presence became established. Traditional hierarchies based on physical intimidation and criminal history did not apply to someone whose authority came from intellectual capability and moral clarity rather than violent potential. Students who initially viewed her as a potential victim found themselves seeking her perspective on problems and conflicts. Jessica Martinez experienced the most dramatic shift in her relationship with Sarah. Initially planning to establish dominance through intimidation, Jessica instead found herself drawn into conversations about purpose, meaning, and personal growth. Sarah's questions about Jessica's goals and motivations were posed without judgment, creating space for reflection that Jessica had never experienced in institutional settings. "Why do you think you're angry all the time?" Sarah asked during one of their evening conversations. "Because the world is screwed up," Jessica replied with automatic defensiveness. "That's probably true," Sarah agreed. "But anger doesn't seem to be changing the world much. What do you think would?" Such exchanges became regular occurrences, with Sarah's genuine curiosity about others' perspectives creating opportunities for self-examination among students accustomed to defensive positioning. Her approach to interpersonal relationships was informed by her experience as a patient, where cooperation and open communication had been essential for survival. Dr. Hendricks continued to monitor Sarah's psychological adjustment, documenting the anomaly her presence represented within Blackwood's population. His regular reports to the administration recommended immediate transfer to an appropriate educational setting, but the Academy's bureaucratic procedures required extensive documentation before placements could be modified. The paperwork necessary for Sarah's transfer was estimated to require 6 to 8 weeks for completion. During this waiting period, Sarah's influence on Blackwood's institutional culture became increasingly apparent. Her approach to conflict resolution, seeking understanding rather than dominance, began to influence how other students handled disputes. Her study habits and academic focus created positive peer pressure for educational achievement. Most significantly, her perspective on institutional authority as potentially beneficial rather than inherently oppressive began to alter the adversarial dynamic that typically characterized student-staff relationships. The first major test of Sarah's developing influence came during a cafeteria incident involving territorial disputes between different student factions. A disagreement over seating arrangements escalated toward physical confrontation, with multiple students preparing for violence. Sarah's intervention consisted of a simple question directed at the primary antagonists. "What are you hoping to accomplish here?" The question disrupted the escalation pattern that typically led to disciplinary action and further institutional restrictions. Students found themselves articulating their underlying concerns: respect, fairness, control, rather than simply asserting dominance through force. The resulting conversation, facilitated by Sarah's continued questions, led to a negotiated resolution that addressed the underlying issues without requiring staff intervention. Marcus Reed witnessed this exchange with amazement. In his experience, student conflicts were resolved through authority intervention, punishment, and the establishment of clear consequences for rule violation. Sarah's approach achieved the same result: conflict resolution, while actually strengthening the social fabric of the student community rather than fragmenting it further. The incident marked a turning point in how Blackwood staff viewed Sarah's presence. Rather than an anomaly requiring correction, she began to be seen as a potential resource for improving the Academy's rehabilitation outcomes. Her natural leadership style, based on intellectual curiosity and genuine concern for others' welfare, offered a model that could benefit the entire student population. Dr. Vasquez scheduled a comprehensive review of Sarah's case, including consultations with medical specialists familiar with her cancer treatment and educational experts qualified to assess her academic needs. The review confirmed what staff observations had already suggested. Sarah's placement at Blackwood was entirely inappropriate for her actual educational requirements, but her influence on the Academy's institutional culture had been remarkably positive. The ethical implications of Sarah's situation created complex dilemmas for the Academy's administration. While she clearly belonged in a college preparatory environment rather than a rehabilitation facility, her presence had generated improvements in student behavior, academic engagement, and overall institutional climate that were difficult to ignore. The question arose whether maintaining her enrollment might serve broader educational purposes, even if it was not optimal for her individual development. Professor Thompson advocated strongly for Sarah's immediate transfer, arguing that her intellectual needs could not be adequately addressed within Blackwood's framework, regardless of her positive influence on other students. He pointed out that keeping her enrolled under false pretenses raised serious questions about informed consent and educational malpractice. Dr. Williams offered a different perspective, suggesting that Sarah's unique combination of intellectual capability and institutional experience might make her an ideal peer mentor for Blackwood's most challenging students. She proposed developing a specialized program that would allow Sarah to receive appropriate academic instruction while also providing structured mentorship opportunities within the Academy. The debate over Sarah's future at Blackwood highlighted fundamental questions about educational philosophy and institutional purpose. Was the Academy's mission primarily to serve individual students' needs or to maximize positive outcomes for the greatest number of students? Could Sarah's exceptional circumstances justify creating new models for peer-based rehabilitation programs? As Sarah's first month at Blackwood concluded, her transformation from misplaced medical patient to institutional leader had become undeniable. Students sought her perspective on personal problems, academic challenges, and conflicts with authority figures. Staff members found themselves implementing behavior management strategies based on her example rather than traditional disciplinary approaches. The Academy's daily operations had been subtly but significantly altered by the presence of someone who approached institutional life with cooperation rather than resistance. Part 2. The Emergence of Strength. The morning Sarah Chen discovered her true power began like any other at Blackwood Rehabilitation Academy. The institutional routine had become as familiar to her as the medical protocols she had followed during cancer treatment. Wake at 5:30 a.m., mandatory fitness training despite her physical limitations, communal breakfast with its careful social navigations, and academic instruction designed for students whose educational needs bore no resemblance to her own. However, this particular morning brought news that would test every adaptive mechanism Sarah had developed during her 17 years of life. Dr. Hendricks called her to his office before first period, his expression carrying the weight of difficult information that Sarah had learned to recognize during her medical treatment. She had become expert at reading the faces of authority figures who carried unwelcome news. Sarah. Dr. Hendricks began, his voice carrying the careful neutrality that medical professionals used when delivering challenging information. I've received an update on your medical status from your oncology team. The words triggered immediate physiological responses that Sarah had hoped never to experience again. Her heart rate accelerated, her breathing became shallow, and the familiar metallic taste of anxiety filled her mouth. These were the same sensations she had experienced before receiving test results, treatment modifications, or prognosis updates during her cancer journey. The latest blood work indicates some irregularities that require immediate investigation. Dr. Wright, Hendricks continued, your oncologist wants you to return to the medical center for comprehensive testing within the next 48 hours. The possibility of cancer recurrence had haunted Sarah throughout her recovery period. Medical literature was filled with statistics about relapse rates, secondary cancers, and long-term complications from treatment. She had learned to live with uncertainty, but the specter of returning to the world of medical institutions, treatment protocols, and potential mortality had never fully receded. What happened next would define not only Sarah's character, but also her understanding of the strength she had developed through adversity. Rather than succumbing to the fear that threatened to overwhelm her, Sarah found herself accessing reserves of resilience that she had not known existed. The institutional environment at Blackwood, rather than weakening her spirit, had provided a framework for applying the survival skills she had learned during medical treatment. "Hendricks," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the emotional turbulence she was experiencing, "I need to ask you about the timing of this testing. Are we talking about possible recurrence or routine monitoring that has shown some variations?" Her question demonstrated the analytical thinking that had helped her navigate medical decision-making during her cancer treatment. Rather than allowing fear to cloud her judgment, Sarah immediately began gathering information necessary for rational assessment of the situation. This response pattern had been crucial during her medical journey, when treatment decisions required understanding complex medical information under emotionally challenging circumstances. Hendricks was impressed by Sarah's composure and analytical approach to potentially devastating news. His experience with adolescent patients had taught him to expect emotional breakdown, denial, or aggressive resistance when serious medical concerns arose. Sarah's immediate focus on information gathering and rational analysis indicated a level of psychological maturity that was remarkable for someone her age. "The testing is precautionary, Doctor," Hendricks explained, "but your oncologist wants to rule out several possibilities, including treatment-related complications and, yes, potential recurrence. The irregularities in your blood work could indicate various conditions, some serious and some relatively minor." Sarah nodded, processing this information with the same methodical approach she had applied to understanding chemotherapy protocols, radiation treatment schedules, and surgical procedures during her cancer treatment. She had learned that medical uncertainty was best managed through careful information gathering, rational decision-making, and the development of contingency plans for multiple possible outcomes. "I'll need to inform my roommate and the students I've been working with," Sarah said. "They deserve to know why I'll be leaving temporarily, and I want to make sure the peer support systems we've developed can continue functioning in my absence." This response revealed the depth of Sarah's transformation during her time at Blackwood. Rather than viewing her institutional relationships as temporary conveniences, she had developed genuine responsibility for the welfare of other students. Her leadership role had evolved naturally from her approach to institutional life, and she now felt obligated to ensure continuity of the positive changes she had helped initiate. Hendricks realized he was witnessing an extraordinary example of character development under pressure. Most students facing serious medical concerns would be entirely focused on their personal situation. Sarah's immediate consideration for others demonstrated a level of psychological integration that was remarkable for someone who had endured significant medical trauma and was now facing potential recurrence. The news of Sarah's medical situation spread through Blackwood's student population with the rapid efficiency characteristic of institutional communities. Students who had come to rely on her perspective and guidance struggled with their own fears about her potential departure. Many of them had never formed meaningful relationships with peers, and the possibility of losing Sarah's influence created anxiety about their ability to maintain the progress they had made. Jessica Martinez was the most visibly affected by the news. Her transformation from aggressive, defensive teenager to someone capable of self-reflection and emotional growth had been directly facilitated by her relationship with Sarah. The prospect of returning to her previous patterns of behavior without Sarah's influence created panic that she struggled to manage. "What am I supposed to do if you don't come back?" Jessica asked during their final evening together before Sarah's departure for medical testing. Sarah's response demonstrated the wisdom she had gained through facing mortality at an age when most teenagers believed themselves invulnerable. "You're supposed to continue becoming the person you want to be," she said simply. "The strength you've developed doesn't depend on my presence. It comes from inside you, from the choices you make every day." This conversation became a template for similar discussions Sarah held with other students who had been influenced by her presence at Blackwood. Rather than positioning herself as indispensable, Sarah consistently emphasized that the positive changes they had made were the result of their own decisions and efforts. Her role had been to provide perspective and encouragement, but the actual transformation had come from within each individual. Professor Thompson observed these interactions with professional fascination. Sarah's approach to leadership and mentorship demonstrated principles that were typically associated with experienced counselors and educators rather than adolescent students. Her ability to empower others while simultaneously preparing them for independence indicated a level of emotional intelligence that was extraordinary for someone her age. The night before her departure, Sarah engaged in a comprehensive review of the peer support system she had helped establish at Blackwood. Students had begun meeting informally to discuss academic goals, personal challenges, and conflict resolution strategies. These gatherings had evolved naturally from Sarah's example of approaching problems through collaborative analysis rather than individual struggle. Sarah documented the informal leadership roles that had emerged among different student groups, identifying individuals who had demonstrated capacity for maintaining positive influence in her absence. She wrote detailed notes about ongoing projects, academic mentorship relationships, and interpersonal dynamics that might require attention. Her preparations resembled those of a professional transferring responsibilities rather than a student leaving temporarily for medical care. Marcus Reed reviewed Sarah's documentation with amazement. In his years of working with juvenile offenders and behavioral problem cases, he had never encountered a student who took such comprehensive responsibility for institutional welfare. Sarah's notes demonstrated understanding of complex social dynamics and practical wisdom about sustaining positive change within challenging environments. The morning of Sarah's departure, the Academy's routine was subtly altered by the acknowledgement of her temporary absence. Students who had rarely expressed concern for others openly discussed their hopes for her return. Staff members who had initially viewed her presence as an administrative error now recognized the loss of a significant positive influence on the institution's culture. Dr. Vasquez personally escorted Sarah to the transportation that would take her to the medical center for testing. During the brief journey to the Academy's main entrance, she reflected on the extraordinary circumstances that had brought this remarkable young woman into their institution and the profound impact she had made during her brief enrollment. Sarah, Dr. Vasquez said as they reached the departure point, "I want you to know that regardless of what happens with your medical situation, you always have a place here if you choose to return. You've contributed more to this institution in 6 weeks than most students contribute during their entire enrollment period." Sarah's response revealed the depth of her understanding about the relationship between strength and service. "Dr. Vasquez, I think I needed to be here as much as the Academy needed me to be here. Sometimes the things that seem like mistakes turn out to be exactly what we need for growth." The medical testing period that followed became another crucible for Sarah's developing character. The procedures she underwent were extensive and uncomfortable, involving multiple imaging studies, bone marrow biopsies, and comprehensive blood analysis. Each test carried the potential for results that could fundamentally alter her life trajectory and force her back into the patient role she had worked so hard to transcend. Dr. Patricia Chan, Sarah's oncologist, was struck by the changes she observed in her former patient. The withdrawn, anxious teenager who had struggled with medical compliance during active treatment had been replaced by a young woman who approached medical procedures with calm competence and asked sophisticated questions about treatment options and prognosis implications. "Sarah, Dr. Chen said during one of their consultation sessions, "I'm observing remarkable psychological growth since your last visit. Can you help me understand what has contributed to this development?" Sarah's answer provided insight into the transformative power of purposeful engagement with adversity. "I think facing mortality gave me perspective about what really matters," she explained. "Then being placed in an environment where I could help others gave me purpose beyond my own survival." When you combine those experiences, fear becomes less paralyzing because you understand that there are things more important than your own comfort or safety. The medical team's evaluation revealed that Sarah's blood irregularities were related to long-term effects of her previous treatment rather than cancer recurrence. While the news required ongoing monitoring and possible intervention, it did not represent an immediate threat to her life or long-term survival prospects. The relief Sarah felt was profound, but her response to the good news demonstrated her continued growth in character and perspective. Rather than simply celebrating her personal good fortune, Sarah immediately began planning how to use her experience to benefit others. She requested meetings with adolescent patients currently undergoing cancer treatment, offering to share her insights about maintaining hope and finding purpose during medical crises. Her approach to peer support in the medical setting mirrored the methods she had developed at Blackwood Academy. Dr. Chen observed Sarah's interactions with current patients with professional interest. The young woman's ability to provide meaningful encouragement and practical guidance to others facing similar challenges indicated a level of psychological integration that was remarkable for someone who had so recently completed her own treatment journey. During her week-long absence from Blackwood, Sarah remained in contact with several students through supervised correspondence. Her letters provided continued guidance and encouragement, while also requesting updates on academic progress and interpersonal developments within the academy. The ongoing nature of these relationships demonstrated that her influence extended beyond physical presence. Jessica Martinez's letters revealed the depth of her personal transformation and her commitment to maintaining the progress she had made with Sarah's guidance. Rather than reverting to previous behavioral patterns, Jessica had assumed a leadership role among students who struggled with anger management, applying principles she had learned through her conversations with Sarah. Professor Thompson reported that academic engagement among Sarah's former study group partners remained high during her absence. Students continued meeting to discuss coursework and provide mutual academic support, suggesting that the peer learning culture Sarah had fostered had become self-sustaining. The week of Sarah's medical evaluation also provided Blackwood's administration with an opportunity to assess the lasting impact of her presence on institutional culture. Statistical analysis revealed significant decreases in disciplinary incidents, improvements in academic performance, and positive changes in student satisfaction surveys that correlated directly with Sarah's enrollment period. Dr. Williams conducted focus group sessions with students who had been most directly influenced by Sarah's presence. Their feedback consistently emphasized her approach to problem solving, her genuine interest in others' welfare, and her ability to reframe challenges as opportunities for growth. Students reported that her example had helped them develop more effective strategies for managing institutional life and personal relationships. When Sarah returned to Blackwood Academy following her medical evaluation, the welcome she received demonstrated the depth of relationships she had built within the institutional community. Students and staff alike expressed genuine relief at her return and interest in her medical results. Her temporary absence had highlighted the positive influence she had established during her brief enrollment. The reunion between Sarah and Jessica was particularly emotional, revealing the authentic friendship that had developed between two young women from vastly different backgrounds. Jessica's successful maintenance of personal growth during Sarah's absence had reinforced her confidence in her ability to continue positive development independent of external support. Dr. Hendricks scheduled a comprehensive review session to discuss Sarah's medical results and their implications for her continued enrollment at Blackwood. The conversation revealed that both Sarah and the academy had been fundamentally changed by their unexpected partnership. "The medical news is encouraging," Dr. Hendricks reported. "Your oncologist expects you to maintain good health with routine monitoring. The question now becomes whether you want to complete your program here at Blackwood or transfer to a more traditional academic setting." Sarah's response surprised everyone involved in her case management. "I'd like to stay," she said without hesitation. "I think I'm learning things here that I couldn't learn anywhere else, and I believe I'm contributing something valuable to this community. My cancer taught me that life is uncertain, but purpose makes uncertainty bearable." This decision represented a complete departure from the original goal of correcting the administrative error that had brought Sarah to Blackwood. Instead of viewing her placement as a mistake requiring correction, she had come to see it as an opportunity for growth and service that she was unwilling to abandon. The Academy's administration faced an unprecedented situation. Sarah's academic needs clearly exceeded what their rehabilitation program could provide, yet her positive influence on institutional culture was undeniable. The ethical implications of her decision required careful consideration of both individual and community welfare. Professor Thompson proposed a solution that would address both concerns. He suggested developing an individualized academic program that would provide Sarah with college preparatory instruction, while also formalizing her role as a peer mentor and institutional leader. This arrangement would ensure that her educational needs were met, while preserving her positive influence on other students. Dr. Vasquez approved the experimental program, recognizing that Sarah's unique circumstances warranted innovative approaches to educational service delivery. The decision established a precedent for student-centered programming that could potentially benefit other exceptional cases in the future. Sarah's formal designation as a peer mentor and academic leader created new opportunities for her to apply the wisdom she had gained through medical adversity and institutional adaptation. Her role included conducting study groups, facilitating conflict resolution sessions, and providing academic tutoring for students struggling with basic educational requirements. The transformation of Blackwood's institutional culture accelerated under Sarah's expanded leadership role. Student-led initiatives became common, academic achievement improved measurably, and disciplinary incidents continued to decline. The Academy's rehabilitation outcomes began attracting attention from educational researchers interested in peer-based intervention models. Jessica Martinez emerged as Sarah's most successful mentorship outcome, eventually assuming responsibility for orientation programs for new students. Her transformation from aggressive, defensive teenager to confident leader demonstrated the potential for dramatic positive change when supportive relationships were combined with purposeful engagement. The peer support networks that Sarah had initiated evolved into permanent features of Blackwood's programming. Student-led study groups, conflict resolution teams, and academic mentorship programs became integral components of the Academy's rehabilitation approach, creating sustainable systems for ongoing positive influence. Dr. Williams documented the psychological principles underlying Sarah's success as a peer mentor. Her approach emphasized empowerment rather than dependency, collaborative problem-solving rather than advice-giving, and the development of internal motivation rather than external compliance. These methods proved remarkably effective with students who had previously resisted traditional counseling approaches. Marcus Reed observed that Sarah's influence had fundamentally altered his understanding of effective behavior management. Students who responded to her guidance with enthusiasm and cooperation often demonstrated the same positive changes when interacting with staff members who adopted similar approaches. The implications for institutional culture were profound and lasting. As Sarah approached the end of her first semester at Blackwood, her academic program had evolved to include college-level coursework delivered through distance learning partnerships with nearby universities. Her intellectual needs were being met while she continued to serve as a catalyst for positive change within the Academy's community. The synthesis of personal growth, academic achievement, and service to others that characterized Sarah's experience at Blackwood demonstrated the potential for transformative education when institutional flexibility was combined with student empowerment. Her journey from misplaced medical patient to institutional leader provided a model for resilience-based approaches to adolescent development. Part 3. The Doctrine of Indestructibility. The philosophy that emerged from Sarah Chen's experience at Blackwood Rehabilitation Academy would eventually be recognized as a revolutionary approach to understanding human resilience and institutional transformation. What began as a bureaucratic error had evolved into a comprehensive demonstration of the principle that individuals who consciously destroy their weaker selves through purposeful engagement with adversity become fundamentally indestructible through external circumstances. Sarah's articulation of this principle began during advanced seminar discussions that Professor Thompson had arranged with visiting scholars from the university's psychology department. These sessions were designed to provide Sarah with intellectual stimulation appropriate to her capabilities while also documenting the philosophical insights she had developed through her unique experiences. Dr. Margaret Hoffman, a renowned expert in post-traumatic growth and resilience psychology, was initially skeptical about the claims being made regarding a teenage cancer survivor's influence on juvenile rehabilitation outcomes. Her academic career had been built on rigorous research methodologies and evidence-based interventions, making her naturally cautious about anecdotal success stories. However, her first meeting with Sarah challenged her preconceptions about adolescent psychological development and the nature of transformative growth. The young woman who entered her interview session demonstrated intellectual sophistication, emotional maturity, and philosophical insight that were remarkable for someone who had experienced significant medical trauma and institutional displacement. Hoffman began, "I've reviewed your academic work and the reports about your influence here at Blackwood. I'm particularly interested in understanding how you've conceptualized your experience and what principles you believe have contributed to your success." Sarah's response revealed the depth of her thinking about the relationship between adversity and strength. "I think most people misunderstand what it means to be strong," she said. "They think strength means avoiding difficulty or overcoming obstacles through force. But real strength comes from allowing difficult experiences to destroy the parts of yourself that don't serve you, so that what remains is genuinely indestructible." This statement became the foundation for what would later be recognized as the Chen Doctrine of Indestructibility, a philosophical framework that integrated insights from existential psychology, resilience research, and transformative learning theory. The doctrine proposed that human beings possess an inherent capacity for self-directed evolution through conscious engagement with adversity. Dr. Hoffman asked Sarah to elaborate on the process of destroying parts of oneself, concerned about the potentially harmful implications of such language for vulnerable populations. Sarah's explanation demonstrated sophisticated understanding of psychological development and the difference between destructive self-criticism and constructive self-transformation. When I was diagnosed with cancer, Sarah explained, I had to let go of my identity as someone who was healthy, strong, and in control of my circumstances. That identity wasn't serving me anymore because it was based on things I couldn't control. The cancer treatment forced me to develop a new identity based on things I could control: my attitude, my choices, my relationships with others. She continued, coming to Blackwood required another transformation. My identity as a victim of administrative error wasn't serving me or anyone else. I had to let go of resentment and self-pity so I could focus on what I could actually contribute to this community. Hoffman recognized that Sarah was describing a process of deliberate psychological reconstruction that paralleled advanced therapeutic interventions typically used with adult populations. The young woman's ability to facilitate these changes independently, without professional guidance, indicated exceptional psychological resources and self-awareness. The conversation shifted to Sarah's understanding of how this transformation process could be applied to help others. Her insights into peer mentorship and institutional culture change were grounded in practical experience but demonstrated theoretical sophistication that impressed the visiting researcher.
People can't be forced to destroy their weaker selves, Sarah observed.
It has to be a voluntary process. But you can create environments where that choice becomes more appealing than remaining stuck in patterns that aren't working. That's what happened for me here, and it's what I try to create for other students. This principle became central to the intervention strategies that Sarah had developed at Blackwood. Rather than confronting students' defensive behaviors directly, she created opportunities for them to experience the benefits of alternative approaches to problem-solving and interpersonal relationships. The voluntary nature of these transformations made them more sustainable and authentic than changes imposed through external pressure. Dr. Hoffman spent 3 days observing Sarah's interactions with other students, documenting the specific techniques and approaches that contributed to her effectiveness as a peer mentor. Her methods consistently emphasized empowerment, collaborative analysis, and the development of internal motivation rather than external compliance. During a group session focused on academic goal setting, Sarah facilitated a discussion about the relationship between short-term discomfort and long-term benefits. Students who had previously shown little interest in educational achievement found themselves articulating sophisticated plans for academic improvement and post-graduation goals. Why do you think academic success requires giving up immediate pleasures? Sarah asked the group. Because studying is boring and hard work, replied Marcus Williams, a 16-year-old with a history of truancy and academic failure. That's one way to look at it, Sarah acknowledged. But what if we think about it differently? What if academic success requires giving up the version of yourself that believes you can't learn difficult things? That's a different kind of sacrifice. This reframing technique was characteristic of Sarah's approach to facilitating self-transformation. Rather than asking students to modify their behaviors, she encouraged them to question the underlying beliefs and self-concepts that generated those behaviors. The results were often dramatic shifts in motivation and self-efficacy. Jessica Martinez had become proficient in applying these techniques with newer students, serving as a demonstration of the transferable nature of Sarah's methods. During Dr. Hoffman's observation period, Jessica conducted an orientation session for recently arrived students that incorporated principles she had learned from her relationship with Sarah. The thing about this place, Jessica told the new arrivals, is that it can make you stronger if you let it, but you have to be willing to let go of the stories you tell yourself about why your life is messed up. Those stories might be true, but they're not helping you. Dr. Hoffman noted that Jessica's presentation lacked the sophisticated language that characterized Sarah's discussions, but contained the same essential insights about voluntary self-transformation and the relationship between identity change and behavioral change. The peer-to-peer transmission of these concepts suggested their practical validity and accessibility. The quantitative data supporting Sarah's influence at Blackwood was compelling. Academic performance indicators showed consistent improvement among students who participated in her study groups and mentorship programs. Disciplinary incident reports revealed significant decreases in violent confrontations, property destruction, and authority conflicts among students who had developed relationships with Sarah. More significantly, follow-up studies of former Blackwood students showed improved long-term outcomes for those who had been enrolled during Sarah's tenure. Recidivism rates were lower, educational attainment was higher, and employment stability was improved compared to historical averages for academy graduates. Professor Thompson compiled comprehensive documentation of the institutional changes that had occurred during Sarah's enrollment period. The Academy's culture had shifted from a purely punitive model focused on behavioral suppression to a more developmental approach emphasizing growth, empowerment, and peer support. These changes had been implemented without modifications to official policies or procedures, demonstrating the power of grassroots cultural transformation. Dr. Vasquez authorized a formal case study of Sarah's impact on Blackwood's operations, recognizing the potential implications for juvenile rehabilitation programming throughout the state system. The study would serve as a pilot project for developing peer mentorship initiatives at other facilities serving similar populations. The research phase of Sarah's documentation process required her to articulate the theoretical foundations of her approach to institutional leadership and peer support. Working with visiting scholars, she developed formal presentations that could be used for training purposes at other facilities. Sarah's theoretical framework integrated insights from multiple psychological disciplines. From existential psychology, she drew concepts about finding meaning in suffering and the importance of voluntary choice in personal transformation. From positive psychology, she incorporated research on post-traumatic growth and character strength development. From systems theory, she understood the interconnected nature of individual and institutional change. The synthesis of these perspectives produced a coherent philosophy of human development that emphasized the transformative potential of consciously engaged adversity. Sarah proposed that individuals who learned to extract growth and meaning from difficult experiences developed psychological resources that were essentially invulnerable to external circumstances. The paradox, Sarah explained during one of her formal presentations, is that you have to become vulnerable to change in order to become invulnerable to circumstances. Most people think that strength means building walls against difficulty, but real strength comes from being so flexible that nothing can break you. This concept of strength through flexibility became central to the training programs that were developed based on Sarah's methods. Staff members at other rehabilitation facilities learned to create environments that encouraged voluntary self-examination and growth rather than imposed behavioral compliance. The pilot implementation of Sarah's approaches at 3 other juvenile facilities produced encouraging preliminary results. Students who participated in peer mentorship programs showed improved academic engagement, reduced behavioral incidents, and increased satisfaction with their institutional experience. Staff members reported improved workplace climate and greater job satisfaction when working with empowered student populations. Hoffman's research team began developing standardized assessment instruments to measure the psychological constructs that Sarah had identified as crucial for transformation. The Sarah Chen Resilience Scale attempted to quantify an individual's capacity for voluntary self-transformation, purpose-driven growth, and meaning-making in adverse circumstances. Initial validation studies suggested that scores on the resilience scale predicted successful adaptation to institutional environments, academic achievement under challenging circumstances, and long-term positive outcomes following rehabilitation programming. The instrument showed particular promise for identifying individuals who could benefit from peer mentorship roles. Sarah's academic program had evolved to include independent research on the applications of her philosophical framework to other populations and settings. She began investigating how the principles of voluntary self-transformation could be applied to addiction recovery, medical rehabilitation, and educational underachievement in traditional school settings. Her research methodology combined qualitative case studies with quantitative outcome measures, creating comprehensive documentation of the processes and results associated with her approach. The work was conducted under the supervision of university faculty members who recognized the potential significance of her insights for multiple fields of human services. The relationship between individual transformation and institutional change became a particular focus of Sarah's research interests. She documented how personal growth among key individuals could catalyze broader cultural shifts within organizations, creating sustainable improvements that persisted beyond the presence of any single change agent. Blackwood Academy had become a laboratory for testing theories about institutional transformation and human development. The changes that had occurred during Sarah's tenure provided evidence for the potential of strength-based approaches to rehabilitation and the importance of peer influence in facilitating positive change. Marcus Reed found that his approach to behavior management had been fundamentally altered by his observations of Sarah's methods. Rather than relying primarily on external consequences and rule enforcement, he began creating opportunities for students to experience the benefits of cooperation, goal setting, and mutual support. Sarah taught me that you can't force people to change. Reed reflected during a staff development session. But you can create conditions where change becomes attractive and achievable. The students respond better when they feel empowered rather than controlled. The philosophical implications of Sarah's work extended beyond juvenile rehabilitation to fundamental questions about human nature and potential. Her experience suggested that individuals possessed greater capacity for self-directed transformation than was typically recognized by mental health and educational systems. Dr. Williams incorporated Sarah's insights into her therapeutic practice, finding that clients responded well to approaches that emphasized their own power to facilitate change rather than their dependence on professional intervention. The shift from a medical model of healing to an empowerment model of growth produced improved outcomes across various client populations. The documentation of Sarah's methods and their outcomes created a comprehensive resource for other institutions seeking to implement peer-based intervention strategies. Training materials, assessment instruments, and implementation guides were developed to support the systematic application of her philosophical framework. Sarah's influence on educational philosophy extended to discussions about the role of adversity in human development. Her experience challenged prevailing approaches that sought to protect young people from difficulty, suggesting instead that purposefully engaged challenges could accelerate growth and character development. The concept of anti-fragility, becoming stronger through stress and challenge, found practical application through Sarah's work at Blackwood. Students who learned to extract growth and meaning from institutional constraints developed psychological resources that served them well in subsequent life challenges. As Sarah approached her graduation from Blackwood's program, the question arose about how to maintain the institutional culture she had helped create. The academy had been fundamentally changed by her presence, but sustaining those changes would require systematic implementation of the principles and practices she had developed. The solution involved creating a formal peer mentorship program that would institutionalize Sarah's methods while providing ongoing opportunities for student leadership and growth. Former students who had been transformed through their relationships with Sarah would return as mentors for new arrivals, creating a sustainable cycle of positive influence. Jessica Martinez was selected as the first official peer mentor coordinator, responsible for training and supporting other student leaders in applying Sarah's methods. Her own transformation from aggressive troublemaker to confident leader provided credibility and inspiration for students beginning their own change processes. The graduation ceremony at Blackwood Academy for Sarah's class was unlike any previous graduation in the institution's history. Rather than simply marking the completion of rehabilitation requirements, the event celebrated transformation, growth, and the development of character strengths that would serve graduates throughout their lives. Sarah's graduation speech articulated the philosophy that had emerged from her experience at Blackwood and her previous medical journey. She spoke about the power of voluntary self-transformation, the importance of finding purpose in adversity, and the indestructible nature of individuals who had consciously evolved beyond their earlier limitations. "We came to this institution because the world decided we needed to be changed," Sarah told the assembled graduates, families, and staff. "But the real change happened when we decided to change ourselves. That decision, to become voluntarily what the world was trying to force us to be, that's what made us truly free." The speech was recorded and distributed as training material for other rehabilitation facilities, providing inspiration and guidance for both staff and students engaged in transformation processes. Sarah's words captured the essence of her philosophical framework and its practical applications. Following graduation, Sarah was accepted to Stanford University's psychology program, where she planned to continue developing and researching applications of her theoretical framework. Her undergraduate thesis would focus on peer-based interventions in institutional settings, building on her practical experience at Blackwood Academy. Hoffman served as Sarah's faculty mentor, recognizing the exceptional nature of her insights and their potential contribution to psychological theory and practice. The research collaboration would provide academic rigor to complement Sarah's practical wisdom about human transformation and institutional change. The Sarah Chen Institute for Transformative Education was established at Blackwood Academy to continue developing and implementing her methods. The institute served as a training center for educators and mental health professionals seeking to incorporate peer mentorship and empowerment-based approaches into their practice. Annual conferences brought together researchers, practitioners, and individuals who had experienced transformation through Sarah's methods. These gatherings provided opportunities for ongoing development of the theoretical framework and its practical applications across various populations and settings. The long-term impact of Sarah's work extended far beyond Blackwood Academy to influence juvenile justice policy, educational practice, and therapeutic intervention throughout the state and beyond. Her demonstration that young people possessed extraordinary capacity for self-transformation and positive influence challenged prevailing assumptions about adolescent development and institutional treatment. 5 years after Sarah's graduation from Blackwood, follow-up studies revealed that the institutional culture she had helped create remained strong and continued to produce positive outcomes for students. The peer mentorship program had evolved into a sophisticated system for facilitating transformation that was being replicated at facilities throughout the region. Jessica Martinez had completed her own education and returned to Blackwood as a professional staff member, bringing both personal experience of transformation and formal training in counseling and education. Her career trajectory demonstrated the potential for individuals who had experienced institutional rehabilitation to become agents of positive change for others. The Chen doctrine of indestructibility had been refined through years of research and application, providing a theoretical framework that integrated philosophical insights with empirical evidence about human resilience and growth. The doctrine proposed that individuals who consciously engaged with adversity for the purpose of self-transformation developed psychological resources that were fundamentally immune to external circumstances. Sarah's ongoing research at Stanford focused on the neurobiological foundations of voluntary transformation, seeking to understand the brain mechanisms that supported deliberate character development and resilience building. Her work suggested that conscious engagement with challenge produced measurable changes in neural structure and function that enhanced stress tolerance and adaptive capacity. The practical applications of her research extended to medical settings, where cancer patients and others facing serious illness learned to apply principles of voluntary transformation to their recovery processes. Sarah's own experience of finding meaning and purpose in medical adversity provided a compelling model for others facing similar challenges. Educational institutions began incorporating transformative learning principles into their curricula, creating opportunities for students to engage purposefully with academic and personal challenges as a means of character development. The approach produced improved outcomes in both academic achievement and social-emotional learning. Military and law enforcement training programs adopted modified versions of Sarah's methods, recognizing their effectiveness for building psychological resilience and adaptive capacity under stress. The voluntary nature of the transformation process was particularly important for populations that operated under high levels of external authority and control. Corporate leadership development programs incorporated insights from the Chen doctrine, helping executives and managers understand how personal transformation could enhance their effectiveness and resilience in challenging business environments. The emphasis on voluntary change and meaning-making resonated with professionals seeking authentic approaches to leadership development. The international recognition of Sarah's work led to speaking engagements and consulting opportunities around the world. Her message about the transformative potential of consciously engaged adversity provided hope and guidance for individuals and organizations facing various forms of challenge and change. The philosophical implications of the Chen doctrine continued to evolve as researchers and practitioners explored its applications across diverse contexts. The fundamental insight that individuals who destroy their weaker selves through purposeful engagement with adversity become indestructible through external circumstances provided a framework for understanding human potential that transcended traditional limitations. Sarah's journey from misplaced cancer patient to transformational leader demonstrated the extraordinary capacity for growth and influence that could emerge when individual resilience was combined with institutional opportunity and purposeful service to others. Her experience suggested that what appeared to be mistakes or misfortunes often contained the seeds of unprecedented growth and contribution. The legacy of Sarah's time at Blackwood Academy extended far beyond the institutional changes she had facilitated to encompass a fundamental shift in understanding about human nature, potential, and the relationship between adversity and strength. Her life had become a living demonstration of the principle that those who consciously destroyed their weaker selves can never be destroyed by others because they have already become everything they were meant to be. The continuing influence of her work provided evidence that individual transformation, when combined with service to others and institutional opportunity, could create ripple effects that extended across generations and geographical boundaries. Sarah Chen's experience had become more than a personal success story. It had evolved into a comprehensive demonstration of human potential and the transformative power of consciously engaged adversity. The document concluded with recognition that Sarah's story was not unique in its potential. Every individual possessed the capacity for similar transformation and influence. What made her experience significant was not its impossibility, but its demonstration that such growth was available to anyone willing to engage voluntarily with the process of becoming their highest and strongest self through purposeful engagement with life's inevitable challenges. The continuing transformation. 10 years after Sarah Chen's graduation from Blackwood Rehabilitation Academy, the institution had become a model for transformative education that was studied and replicated internationally. The administrative error that had mistakenly placed a cancer survivor in a facility for juvenile offenders had evolved into a systematic approach to human development that challenged fundamental assumptions about education, rehabilitation, and human potential. The final documentation of Sarah's impact included testimonials from hundreds of individuals whose lives had been changed through direct or indirect exposure to her methods and philosophy. Students, staff members, family members, and community leaders provided evidence of the far-reaching effects of one person's decision to transform apparent misfortune into purposeful service. Dr. Chen, now Dr. Dame. Sarah Chen Martinez had completed her doctoral dissertation on voluntary transformation and institutional culture change, a longitudinal study of peer-based interventions in closed systems. Her research had established the empirical foundation for approaches to human development that emphasized empowerment, purpose, and the transformative potential of consciously engaged adversity. The work continued, with new generations of young people learning that they possessed the power to destroy their weaker selves and become genuinely indestructible through their own choices and actions. The principle that had emerged from a bureaucratic mistake had become a systematic approach to human flourishing that honored both individual potential and collective responsibility. Sarah's story had become proof that there are no accidents in human development, only opportunities for growth that are either seized or missed. Her choice to embrace an unexpected placement and transform it into meaningful service had demonstrated that the strongest individuals are those who voluntarily become everything they are capable of becoming, making themselves invulnerable to external circumstances through the depth of their inner transformation. The document stands as comprehensive evidence that human beings possess extraordinary capacity for growth, influence, and service when they learn to work with adversity rather than against it, finding in their greatest challenges the raw material for their most significant contributions to the world.